Okay, year 8, new setting, the history office. Thought I'd mix it up a little bit. Now, video for you, year 8, and it's going to be talking, or I'm going to be talking about, the causes of the English Civil War. It's something that you lot have been asking about. It's something that will be on your exam, or the Civil War will be on your exam. So the causes of the English Civil War is something that you've been asking about, asking me to do a video. So here it is. There are loads of causes of the English Civil War. It's a very long build-up towards the war. It doesn't just happen like that. There are loads and loads of things that build up over time between Charles and Parliament, King Charles I and Parliament. They fall out about a whole host of things and a whole host of events that occur in the build-up to the English Civil War. So I'm going to talk about a few of them. Not all of them. You've got loads written in your exercise book and you should be using that to revise with, but I'm going to talk about quite a few of the events that happened before the English Civil War that, as I say, caused the war, lead up to it. So, as we know, the English Civil War is a war in England between King Charles I and his army of royalists and Parliament, Oliver Cromwell's army of people who support Parliament, parliamentarians. Now, bit of context, way before the war begins, when Charles I became King of England, and Scotland and Ireland, but when he became King of England, he was predominantly taking over a country that was predominantly Protestant. Okay, so England is mostly Protestant. Most of the people in England are Protestants, they are not Catholic, and in fact Catholics are generally quite unpopular in England. Protestantism is the religion, Catholicism, or being a Catholic, is not very widely accepted. So Catholics are unpopular, Protestants are the majority of people in England. Charles also believed in something called the divine right of kings. That should be ringing some bells for you, the divine right of kings, okay? And that means that Charles believed, and many other kings believed this as well, but Charles believed that the only reason he was king was because God had wished it so. God had made him king. So therefore, anything that Charles believed or thought or said or decided was basically given the thumbs up by God. God has made me, King Charles, King of England, and therefore anything that I think or say or do is approved by God. Okay, God has put me here, and therefore everything I do has the approval of God. Okay, so when people try and tell him to change his mind or do certain things, he's thinking, you can't tell me what to do because not only am I King of England, but God made me King of England. It's the whole reason why I'm here in the first place. So if you disagree with me, you're also disagreeing with God, which, as we know, in quite religious times, which this was, is not a good thing to be disagreeing with God. So Charles, as we know, becomes so unpopular, particularly with Parliament in England, that it leads to civil war. It leads to the war between the King's army and Parliament's army. But what made Charles so unpopular with Parliament? What made him unpopular with Parliament? Loads of things, I'm going to talk about them now. First of all, Charles married Henrietta Maria. Most of you should be remembering this, or you should all remember this, but let me talk you through it. Charles married Henrietta Maria. She's a princess from France, so the daughter of the French king, and she's a Catholic. Okay, now that is obviously not a popular decision because, as I say, Catholics in England are not very popular. But what makes it a particularly unpopular decision is the fact that if the Queen of England now is a Catholic, she is going to be bringing up the children. So if King Charles and Henrietta Maria have children, which they did, those children will be educated by her. They'll be brought up to think like and be Catholics. And again, the people of England aren't very happy about this because they think, well, if the future kings and queens of England are being educated and brought up by a Catholic, then maybe when they become king or queen, they will make it so that the whole of England has to go back to being Catholic, and we don't want that. So it was a really unpopular decision for Charles to marry Henrietta Maria because she was a Catholic. Another thing that made Charles unpopular with Parliament was he stayed loyal to bad advisors. Okay, for example, in the year 1626, Lord Buckingham, who was a very close advisor to King Charles, wasted lots of money on a failed naval attack, so ships, against Spain. So Lord Buckingham spent a load of money on attacking the Spanish Navy, and it backfired big time, it failed. And because of this, because he basically wasted this money on this attack, Parliament wanted Charles to sack him. They said, get rid of Lord Buckingham, he's useless, he's rubbish, get rid of him. But Charles, as I say, Charles and Buckingham were very close friends. They were very close together, really good friends and really good pals. So when Parliament tell Charles to get rid of Buckingham, he doesn't. And in fact, he goes one further. He doesn't just not get rid of Buckingham, he keeps Buckingham in his place. But he also calls for the MPs, the members of Parliament, who wanted Buckingham to be sacked. Charles calls for them to be arrested. So he has the MPs who didn't like Buckingham arrested, which is, again, quite extreme. As a result of this, Parliament then say, right, Charles, you can't raise any money, get any taxes without our permission. You can't raise any taxes without our permission. You have to consult with us first and ask us first, because they're really angry at Charles for doing this, for not only ignoring their advice, but also having many of them arrested because they just wanted to get rid of Lord Buckingham. So they said, as I say, you can't raise any taxes without our permission. So what does King Charles do? Well, in the year 1628, Charles ran out of money and he raised taxes without Parliament's permission. 1628, ran out of money and he just raised the tax himself. So I don't need Parliament, I can tax the people of England myself. Simple, okay? Which again made him very unpopular with Parliament. They told him to ask them for tax, and instead he's just gone and taxed anyway, collected money anyway. Because when Parliament say, Charles, you shouldn't be doing this, we're very angry at this, so, stop it. Charles responds by ruling without Parliament for 11 years. The 11 years tyranny that becomes known as, where literally between 1629 and 1640, Charles rules England without ever consulting Parliament, never calls them, never speaks to them, never asks for their advice. He rules England on his own, like a dictator, 11 years without Parliament, okay? Which again, really makes him unpopular with Parliament, because he's ignoring them. Another thing that makes Charles unpopular with Parliament and the people of England, but particularly Parliament, is he carries on collecting taxes without Parliament's permission, obviously, during these 11 years. And one thing that he does in the year 1634 is the ship money. The ship money, or the ship tax. There you go. Ship money and the ship tax. Same thing, you can call it either. But I'll call it ship money in this video. So ship money, he ran out of money in 1634 and needs some more. So what he did was he forced all of the coastal counties, so counties in England that are by the coast, to pay a tax to build ships. Now this tax could be called in times of war. In times of war, when England needed a navy, they needed to build ships to go off to war. This tax could be called, people would pay it. They'd say, okay, we're at war, so here you go, Charles, here's the tax, because, you need it to build ships. That's fair enough. There was no war going on at this time between England and anyone. Okay, it was peacetime. No wars going on, but yet Charles has called this tax that is only allowed to be called, or should only really be called, during wartime. So forces all the coastal counties to pay it, collects all their money, and he is so happy with this, because he gets quite a lot of money from it, that he does it again in 1635, calls for the tax again, and he does it again in 1636. So he keeps calling for this tax, this ship money, when he really shouldn't be. The only time he's really allowed to get this tax is during times of war, and there is no war going on. So that really upsets Parliament, and obviously the people in the coastal counties who are having to pay for this. Okay, all because Charles isn't very good at looking after his money. Another thing that Charles does that makes him very unpopular with Parliament is he interferes with the church. So he, for example, he introduced a new prayer book. I'll come back to that in a little while. And he also told Protestant ministers, so priests and bishops, to decorate their churches. Now, as we know, and I've talked about this in a previous video, in the Tudor video about religion, Protestants don't really like decorations in their church. They like their churches to be very plain. Remember, the main religion in England at this time is Protestantism. So when Charles tells the Protestants to decorate their churches, it's not a very popular idea because, as I say, most Protestants, all Protestants like plain churches. They don't like decorations. So again, they get annoyed at that. Charles, why are you interfering with the church? Why are you reforming the church? It's none of your business, and stop asking Protestants to decorate their churches. That's not what we like. Okay, so they get angry at him for that. Another thing that he does to do with religion is he punished Puritans. Okay, now, when Charles starts changing the churches and decorating them and interfering, the Puritans speak out against this. They produce pamphlets that say Charles should not be interfering with the church. We're really cross with him. We don't like what he's doing. And Charles responds to this by having their ears cut off. So the Puritans that made these pamphlets that criticised Charles for changing the church, he has their ears cut off. So again, quite a strong reaction to people speaking out against him. But actually all this does is give people even more reason to dislike him. Okay, how does he respond to criticism? Well, he cuts your ears off. Okay, not really the kind of behaviour you would want from your king. Okay, particularly over something like religion. So not calling Parliament is another thing that he does to annoy Parliament. As I've talked already about the 11 years tyranny, he doesn't call Parliament. He tries to rule without Parliament. Well, he does rule without Parliament for those 11 years. In the first 5 years of his reign, going back to when he first became king, he only called Parliament 3 times. So he's got a horrible track record of not calling and not meeting with and not listening to Parliament and Parliament's advice. Now remember, that's a bad thing to do because he's supposed to call them to discuss important matters and to raise taxes. Obviously, he's raising taxes by himself, which he shouldn't be doing. So all of these things anger Parliament. Parliament feel, quite rightly, that they're being ignored, and they shouldn't be ignored. They should be listened to. Now, in 1640, in April 1640, Charles does call Parliament again because once again he's got money issues. Okay, he's run out of money and he needs Parliament's advice and Parliament's help to get money. Okay, so he calls a Parliament in, as I say, April 1640, and this Parliament became known as the Short Parliament. I'll tell you why in a second. So he calls this Parliament and he says, "I've run out of money, so can you help me please by collecting taxes and giving me some money?" And the Parliament turn around and say to him, "We won't give you any money or any tax until you stop taxing the country by yourself and you stop reforming the church. Leave the church alone, leave taxes alone, give us more of a say and more of a job to do, stop ignoring us, and we'll give you some money." And Charles responds to this by closing down the Parliament after just 3 weeks, hence why it's known as the Short Parliament, because Parliaments are meant to meet for quite a long time, for most of the year actually. So after 3 weeks, he shuts them down, hence the Short Parliament. Another thing that really angers Parliament and the rest of England, really, and Scotland, is the Scottish invasion. Now remember, I said this at the start of the video, that King Charles is king of England and Scotland and Ireland. But he's king of England and Scotland. But he's already been interfering with the church in England. And then he starts to interfere with the church in Scotland. He imposes this new prayer book that he's written, this English prayer book on the Scottish church. And the Scottish get really angry about this, really angry, to the point where they actually end up putting an army together, a lot of Scottish rebels, they put an army together and end up battling against the English. Okay, they invade England and battle against the English. And Charles is forced to make peace with them. He can't actually defeat them. So he has to make peace with the Scottish and say, "I'm really sorry for everything I've done." And the Scottish say, "Okay, you've got to stop interfering with our church. And what's more, you've got to pay us expenses or reparations. You've got to pay us for all the trouble, for us putting our army together and coming down to England. You've got to pay us for what we've done. Okay, pay us some compensation, if you will." So in response to this, Charles calls Parliament in November 1640. And the Parliament, again, agree to help Charles out and give him some money as long as Charles lets them meet more regularly and that he punishes his ministers. Okay, the ones who have been giving him bad advice, they say, you've got to punish them, Charles, sack them and punish them. And he agrees to this, actually. One thing he doesn't agree to, though, is not interfering with the church in England. He says, no, I'm going to carry on with that. You can't tell me what to do, which, again, upsets many people in Parliament. So they get some of what they want, but not all of what they want, because Charles carries on interfering with the church and reforming the church. And all this creates even more tension until in 1642, so 2 years later, 2 years after the Scottish invasion, Parliament put together something called the 19 Propositions. And the 19 Propositions is basically a list of 19 propositions or demands, is another word for that, that they want Charles to agree to. Now, I'm not going to read all of them out, but some of the key ones are that Parliament want a say in everything to do with the country. Any big decisions that are made to do with the country, Charles can't make them by himself. Parliament need to approve them. So anything that's to do with the country, with England, with reforms and things like that, Parliament need to approve it. Okay, that's the main one. They also say that any government ministers need to be approved by Parliament. So Charles can't just appoint his friends to high positions. Parliament need to say yes or no. They also want to control the education of the king's children. I've talked about that before. They don't want the king's children to grow up Catholic, so they want to actually educate the king's children and bring them up. Charles has to stop reforming the church. That's a big one. So listen, Charles, stop messing around with the church. Can't do that anymore. And also Parliament wanted to control the army, because again, if you've got control of the army, that gives you a great deal of power. So Parliament wanted to control the army. Charles refuses all of this. He says, look, basically this will make me a phantom of a king, which basically means a king in name only, a king without any real power. So Charles says, no, I'm not going to give up all my power. And this is essentially the beginning of the Civil War, because the Civil War starts just a few months later in August 1642, when the two armies, the Parliament army and the King's army, start fighting each other, literally. And again, you've got plenty more on the Civil War in your exercise book. I was just going to talk about the causes, which I've done. So all those things combined lead up to the English Civil War. All of those things cause the war between the King's army and Parliament's army. Big tension between the King and the Parliament. They keep falling out to the point of, as I say, in 1642, it reaches the point of civil war. Okay, so that's the causes of the English Civil War. Hopefully it's cleared a few things up for those Year 8s who were asking for a video. I'm going to do another video talking about Oliver Cromwell, maybe later today. Watch this space, if not it'll be tomorrow. But keep revising, and I will see you soon.